Hey there, welcome back to the Stay at Home Detectives podcast. Today we're diving into the mysteries of one of the most haunted cemeteries in the Chicagoland area, Bachelor's Grove.
Gloomy nights, vanishing ghosts, and theories of cemeteries. About 24 miles south and slightly west of Chicago, down a trail off of the Midlothian Turnpike, on the south side of the Rubio Woods Forest Preserve, sits the small cemetery, Bachelor's Grove. It's the oldest cemetery in all of Cook County, with its first burial dating back to around 1834. Although there are still about 80 graves here, the headstones are sparse due to decades of vandalism and the poor upkeep. Sections of chain link fence still wrap around the perimeter, and a murky quarry pond sits to the northwest. Small toys and trinkets litter the ground beside the gravestones of a couple of the infants.
Some have said that Bachelor's Grove is haunted by an older woman who stands outside of her white house and waits for a motorist to come by. Although this is a popular theory, there are more detailed events that happen within the cemetery itself. A ghostly woman in white is said to repeatedly visit the grave of her infant child and has been seen carrying her in the glow of the full moon around the pond. One of the most famous legends of Bachelor's Grove has a popular urban legend around the United States and the United Kingdom since at least the 1940s. Known typically as the boyfriend's death, the story tells of a teen couple who parks in a lover's lane in the woods. When the boy becomes too passionate, the girl asks to be taken home, but the car won't start. After several tries, the boy leaves the girl to walk to the road and flag down help. After he departs, the wind stirs up as a storm comes in. The trees are creaking and bending in the wind, and the girl hears the branches scraping the top of the car. She's uneasy but stays put until she gratefully sees flashing blue lights coming down the road. When the girl gets out of the car, she's surprised to see that her boyfriend is not with the police officers in the car. They say to her, "Just walk towards us and don't turn around." Of course, the girl turns around, and when she does, she sees her boyfriend hanging upside down over their car, his throat slit from ear to ear and his fingernails scraping the top of the car.
Another common sighting is a white one-story Victorian house, which many call the Phantom Farmhouse and the Magic House. It has a porch swing and a picket fence around it. The house usually appears transparent, with a yellow-orange light in its windows that flickers as if it is from a lit candle. Many reports say that it shrinks away and eventually disappears when approached, though a legend remains warning that if you do enter it, you'll never be able to return. Several records show various houses standing on or near the grounds in the past. Though none of them resemble the disappearing house exactly, whosever house it was, it continues to be spotted in the cemetery to this day. On occasion, a strange mist is often seen around the building as it fades in and out of our view.
Another immensely popular tale at the cemetery is that of the Hook or the Hooked Maniac. In this tale, another couple is parked along a dark forest road one night kissing. Suddenly, the music is interrupted by an emergency announcement. A killer has escaped the nearby asylum and is on the loose in the area. He is identifiable by a hook he wears in place of a missing hand. The girl is terrified and begs to be taken home immediately. The young man grudgingly obliges, but when they arrive at her house, he goes around to open the door and finds a rusted hook swinging from the door handle.
The unexplained lights of Bachelor's Grove are some of the most prolific phenomenon experienced here or anywhere. In fact, countless visitors and investigators have photographed or filmed these lights, which are seen as often in the daytime as at night and include the colors blue, white, red, green, and yellow versions. The slate has been seen both on the old turnpike path east and west of the cemetery, as well as in the burying ground itself. Apparently, the appearances of this light were at first mistaken for fireworks being shot off, having the appearance of roaming candles or other amusements.
One of the most well-known ghost stories of Bachelor's Grove is also one with few documented witnesses. Since the late 1970s or early 1980s, the story has circulated of a phantom farmer and plow horse seen on or near the new Midlothian Turnpike. According to the story, this is the apparition of a local farmer who was plowing his land near the quarry in the 1870s, when the horse either became frightened and bolted or simply got too close to the quarry edge, pulling in both the farmer and the plow, and ultimately drowning them. 2 incidents have been publicly shared by witnesses to this apparition. including one dating back to the 1970s, in which 2 local law enforcement officers saw a farmer driving his plow and horse up out of the quarry pond and across 143rd Street, disappearing into Rubio Woods across the road. It has been rumored for years that Al Capone had his men dump bodies into the pond that lies within the cemetery. For a little bit of background, if you're not familiar, Al Capone, also known as Scarface, was an American gangster and businessman who attained notoriety during the Prohibition era as the co-founder and boss of the Chicago outfit. His 7-year reign as a crime boss ended when he went to prison at the age of 33. Although this has never been officially verified and is pure speculation, many people think that there could be potentially hundreds of bodies down in there.
You know what's really interesting about that is I've heard that theory so many times, and then it always makes me wonder, why have they never emptied it and looked? Like, what are you doing?
I don't know.
I mean, I believe it because not a lot of people ever wanted to go to Bachelor's Grove, and for those of you that are familiar with the story or have been to the cemetery, like ourselves,
Yeah.
I've often wondered if that's true. I mean, like, yeah, all the ghost stuff is, I believe it's all true. I mean, that's just my own speculation, but I really want to know if his men and him dumped bodies there.
I mean, it's very possible. It's very possible. I think it would be interesting to do a little bit more research and see if there's ever been anything done to that pond. If they have, if it's ever maybe dried up, because we don't know. It could be completely dried up at this point. When was the last time that anyone went and looked?
I feel like we need to take a drive.
Possibly. But I did go in one time as a child with my grandma. We went inside the cemetery and we were just looking around taking pictures. It's kind of a blur. I don't really remember everything, but it was a summer day. The sun was out, but it was very eerie. I remember walking through there. But as a teenager, as we got older, there was a lot of cult activity in Bachelor's Grove. And there still could possibly be a lot of cult activity. But I remember before I even got a chance to get into the cemetery, there was a police officer that caught me and it was a group of friends and pulled us off to the side and said, "What are you doing? Like, don't go in there." I mean, if a police officer's telling you not to go in there because he knows what's going on, then take his advice, right? But I just think it's so interesting now that it's been so many years later, if there's been any other eyewitness accounts of things that have happened and what is going on with that pond. Because there's also stories of ghost dogs. Those have said to be seen around the cemetery at all times during the day and during the night. I haven't personally seen those, but there's just so many stories as we've been going through some of these stories of Bachelor's Grove. There's so many of them.
I remember, okay, disclaimer. Please do not try to go to this cemetery.
Yes, please don't. It may not be safe.
I know this is going to sound really weird. And for those of you listening and for those of you that know my family or are in my family was really big into ghost hunting. Bachelor's Grove, Resurrection Cemetery, but Bachelor's Grove was always the biggest one. I can't tell you how many times I've actually went, whether it been during the day or at night. I should actually see if I could find the pictures. Our aunt had pictures of the lights and that red light specifically.
Yes.
And it's just coming back to me now. Our family used to always go on ghost tours. And for those of you from the area, if you know Richard Crowe, I remember when they first started going on these tours and I was really upset because I really wanted to join in. And I was young and they're like, "You're too little, you can't go." I'm like, "Oh, well, that kind of stinks." My mom had a VHS tape of Richard Crowe, and I bet you anything, I think I know where that cassette tape is.
But I should talk to my grandmother because she took me on a Richard Crowe ghost tour when I was like 12 years old in downtown Chicago, and we got to see and visit all of the historical landmarks, all of the most haunted places in downtown Chicago. I know we even visited an alleyway where supposedly one of the gangsters from Al Capone's crew was murdered or something to that effect, if I'm recalling that right. But I remember the final place or the final destination in the tour was Bachelor's Grove and Resurrection Cemetery, or Resurrection Cemetery and Bachelor's Grove in that order. But how crazy. Like it was crazy. And by the time we got done with the ghost tour and we got to those places, it was dark. I do recall seeing some questionable lights over by Bachelor's Grove, and I remember them pointing it out because we were on like this big tour bus. It was a really cool experience. I should ask my grandmother if she remembers. I know she does.
She probably does.
Oh, she does. I wish we would have recorded it or something. All I have are my memories now, you know?
On the video recorders?
Yeah, on the video recorders.
I have so many pictures of my dad with those video recorders.
With the little tiny cassette tapes that you had to have a VHS converter. So it was like a VHS tape that you put the tiny little tape in. It looked like a cassette tape in order to watch the video footage.
You guys have it so lucky.
Man, we're showing our age right now.
Yeah, we are showing our age. We will do an episode on Resurrection Cemetery as well, because it's also one of the most haunted cemeteries, and the whole story behind that is really wicked.
Yes.
That's a very interesting one, so stay tuned for that. Richard Crowe, he was an awesome guy. I had met him. He was born in 1948. He was a local ghost hunter. He was the first one to weave out tales about Bachelor's Grove. And he is the individual that's responsible with turning it into one of the best-known haunted cemeteries in the world. Growing up on Chicago's South Side, Mr. Crowe and his two sisters would listen to their grandmother tell ghostly tales from the old country in Poland. That fascinated him. It wasn't just the supernatural that attracted Mr. Crowe. He loved the historical and literary aspects of such lore. At DePaul University, he received a master's in English literature. While a DePaul student, his geography professor suggested that Mr. Crowe put together a tour of haunted Chicago. Mr. Crowe proceeded to organize such a tour for DePaul's Geographic Society, but the demand was much greater. This geographical tour ended up with a wait list of over 200 people. The tour grew to one of the biggest Chicago supernatural tours. Unfortunately, for those of you that have been on his tour, have family, are familiar with him, he passed away in 2012 at the age of 64 years old. He ended up having some complications from pancreatic cancer. I remember my mom had told me that he passed away and she was really upset. Like, I think she was fangirling on Richard Crowe like hardcore over the years, because it's a little weird that my family kept going on these tours.
Well, wasn't just your family. Apparently, both of our families are interesting, which we both know. I mean, we've been friends for, if anybody doesn't know, Sam and I have been friends for 29 years, almost 30 years we've been friends. So my family is her family is my family, and our families are very, very similar. We may not be blood, but we're still sisters, and it's just a little weird because our families always liked the same things. We're always into the hauntings and the tours and...
Wait, so I don't know where you got 29 from. I'm only 21.
Yeah, me too. I'm only 20.
Yeah.
Sure.
What's funny is my grandmother's still really big into all of this as well. And I was at Walgreens a couple months ago, and they actually had a book of the hauntings of Bachelor's Grove. And she's like, oh my God, please buy it for me. You have to go back. You have to buy me this book.
At Walgreens, how ironic. Like, out of all the places for it to be.
Yeah, well, we're older now. We have to get our prescriptions.
Yes.
And then they want us to buy books. I wish that somebody would come out with another really cool ghost tour. I'd be all about it. Richard Crowe was awesome. We're going to play some of a radio clip that Richard Crowe had done in 1982 regarding Bachelor's Grove.
Ooh.
And I did some digging to find this, so I'm really excited.
Yes, I'd like to talk to Richard about Bachelor's Grove out in Oak Forest, I believe it is.
It's 143rd Street east of Ridgeland.
Yes. What are your experiences out there? What have you heard?
Well, I've heard things, and I have had some experiences. It's one place that I've finally been at the right place at the right time, I guess, to have an experience. But over the years, and I've been hearing about this, well, since high school days, over the years I've heard many different stories regarding this old little German community farming cemetery. The cemetery itself dates back to the 1840s. It's next to a stream of running water, next to a pond. We have this running water connection pop up in many, many ghost stories. over the years, I've been hearing things about blue ghost lights, a disappearing house, disappearing cars, all different kinds of things taking place out there, the whole gamut of really unusual and bizarre things. But when it comes to personal experiences, I did have something happen to me twice out there, somewhat similar, both occasions. I was glad it happened a second time, actually, so I felt a lot easier that the first time I was not having some kind of a problem coming to grips with what was going on. It really did happen. I'm convinced it really happened the first time when it happened a second. In May of 1977, a friend of mine, Jim Brandon, was in town. Jim had published a paperback, had written a paperback called Weird America, and it's a state-by-state guide of unusual sites, strange, haunted, bizarre sites around the United States. Much of the state of Illinois was me, and material that I had contributed to Jim. Jim lives currently down in the Peoria area, but he was living in Colorado at that time. He was in town. He had mentioned Bachelor's Grove in that book and wanted to see it for himself. He had included it in the book based on just my telling him that it certainly was a place worthy of inclusion in his book.
What time of day did you go out there, by the way?
Well, we drove out there one night, got out there shortly after 9:30 or so, and we were out there walking around the old cemetery. It was dark out. We were doing nothing but feeding the mosquitoes. It was about it. We didn't see anything, observe anything at all in the cemetery, which was not unusual because I had never experienced anything there before that, although I had collected many interesting reports from people who I believed were credible witnesses. In leaving the place, we began to drive west on 143rd Street. We were just crossing the creek, and on the west side of the creek, on the right-hand side of the road, there was a car parked, and I just swerved a little bit towards the center strip, just to make sure the guy wasn't going to open his door and jump out or something like that. I didn't want to strike the car or anybody getting out nearby, just to be on the safe side. As I passed that car, began to pass the car, suddenly there was no more car to pass. The car disappeared. It was a parked car, all dark. It was there 1 second and gone the next. Well, I just hit the brakes in the middle of the road and stopped, and I yelled, "Hey, Jim, did you see that?" Now, Jim was facing me talking at the time. I can't even remember what we were talking about. I was just so excited about this. And I said, "Didn't you see that car disappear? It was a car right there." He was not facing me, did not see it, and to make matters worse, didn't even believe me. And it really got to me that he didn't believe me. Here's a guy that had just written a book called Weird America, and I brought out to show the place to, and here we were looking for unusual phenomena. And the night that it happens, I'm with a witness who would be a very credible witness, and yet he was facing me, not paying attention, did not see it. He tried to convince me that I was wrong, that I had perhaps seen a car in the rearview mirror and just through some lazy mental process had assumed it was at the side of the road. And I kept saying, "No, Jim, there's no cars anywhere coming towards us or behind us. There's nothing on the road." It was a very quiet moment. By the way, as soon as I stopped and looked at my watch, it was 2 minutes after 10 o'clock. There's just no way I could explain it. I hadn't been overly tired, although we had a sandwich earlier at an Italian restaurant nearby and had a couple of beers to go with it. A couple of beers doesn't make me see things. It was just nothing that could explain what had happened. A little over a year later, in September of 1978, I was driving down Cicero Avenue east of the site, and when I was nearby, had the time, whenever I'm nearby and do have the time, and I always have the inclination, I drove out there to check out the site again. And driving towards the cemetery, backing across the road diagonally, was a car, which I presumed to be a squad car, police car, backing into the Rubio Woods Forest Preserve entrance. They do that all the time. They sit there and watch the area or set up radar, and I just automatically assumed that it had to be a squad car, so I watched my speed and just kept looking to the right to see where that car had gone. It took me only a few seconds to get there. When I got there to the Rubio Woods entrance, I was shocked to find that the chain was up over the entrance. There were ditches on either side of the entranceway, nowhere for a car to go. That car was not there, nowhere for the car to be. That car had to have disappeared also. So the second car, lights on in motion, backing into the drive. The first car darkened, parked at the side of the road, but both cars disappeared for me just next to this very famous cemetery, Bachelor's Grove.
And these are common reports of the cars disappearing?
Yes, disappearing car reports are common in the area. These car reports are very, very interesting to me because it's a little bit more unusual and bizarre than your common, ordinary people ghosts. When you have inanimate object ghosts, you're really starting to get into some.
Were these late model cars?
The second car, the one that was in motion, seemed to be a older car. It was longer and it had the bigger tail lights and so on. Although the curious thing about it is that you see cars all the time on the road. You don't automatically try to figure out the make and model. And when it's gone, then it's too late to try to figure out what it is.
Right.
In the instance when it's gone, then you're trying to rack your brains, well, just exactly what did it look like? What did it seem like? That car, I could only see the lights up ahead backing across the road, and I suppose the silhouette vaguely, but not much. The first car, though, seemed to be a medium-sized, smaller Chevy-type car, just a squared-off car, nothing very fancy, but a compact or a medium-sized car, just parked there at the side of the road. Dark in color and darkened inside.
Could I share something that happened to me about 15, 16 years ago?
At Bachelor's Grove?
At Bachelor's
yes,
Grove. And
certainly.
It actually ended up on the front page of the Chicago Tribune, and none of us talked about it. 10 of us went out there, 3 in one car and 7 in another car. And we went out there, and it was so dark, you know, how that entrance has the trees just overlap each other. And it was so dark in that access road. We got about 30 feet in, and all of a sudden everybody else halt. And one of the cars was an old Hudson, and we decided we'd back in. So out everybody goes, and we backed in. And we backed in, and we were in high school at the time. 10 kids aged anywhere from 15 to 18. And we saw lights. And this was the first time at that particular site that any of us had ever gone, but we'd heard about this for years. We backed in and went as far as we could because there's some logs that go across the road at a certain point, and we saw some lights in the graveyard, in the cemetery, and we did have a couple of flashlights, and one of the guys flashed his light, and we saw some movement. It could have been our imagination, but whatever. We saw some movement. 10 of us walking as tightly as we could. If you can imagine that. 10 guys walking as close as maybe 4 people naturally would walk together. We went over there, and there was a coffin set afire. And this was spring of '65, I believe it was, but it was on the front page of the Chicago Tribune. And we went out there into the graveyard, and one of the guys was saying, "This is where I saw that guy disappear." And when he flashed the light over there was like 7 out of the 10 that saw something there, and 3 of us weren't paying attention. I have to admit that I'm one of the 3 that really wasn't watching when the guy just haphazardly shone a light to indicate where he saw some movement when we first came up, and the 7 swear that they saw something, and there were 2 or 3 markers knocked down, and it could have been just random vandalism or whatever it was. And then shortly we were joined by another car that just happened to come out there, and we didn't know these people from Adam. It was 2 guys and 2 girls who also had heard some stories. We saw the lights. We went over to the coffin that was burning. We told them what we had seen. The 2 new couples said that they had seen movement also. And just at that point, the sheriff's police came in, because I guess that area is patrolled by the sheriff's police. And they were going to arrest us, and our hearts were in our stomachs and everything else. Well, one of the guys that we were with, his father is or at that time was chief of police of a suburban town out on the suburbs, and it was him who got us out of all the trouble. But when we explained to the sheriff's police, and there was about 4 or 5 of the sheriff's police that came out, and we told them about these lights that we'd seen and everything. And it was the same guy that had the lantern shone the light again. He was indicating this is where we saw it, and there was something that the cops saw, and the cops wouldn't even go out there. The cops would not even go out there.
I'd love to hear any feedback in the comments of those of you that are familiar with it, or if you've went on any of the tours, or if you've been to Bachelor's Grove, if you know the story about it, or if your family was as crazy as ours was.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for tuning in today. We enjoyed diving into the mysteries of Bachelor's Grove. As Sam said, we will be doing an episode on Resurrection Cemetery here soon. So make sure that you're subscribed to the podcast and you have your notifications turned on so you don't miss when that episode goes live. But we will catch you next time. Stay at home detective style.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.